cells. Now, this virus was discovered in 2002 in China as SARS, and it was called SARS. And then in 2012, it was transformed to a different variant, which was known as MERS in the Middle East. And in 2019, it started as a new strain in China, Wuhan, China, and it started as an epidemic in Wuhan. But in 2020 now, early 2020, the WHO decided or announced a pandemic around the globe. The last pandemic which faced the world was in 1918, and that was the Spanish flu. So what challenges most of the world faced? The spread of the virus is really quick. We had lack of beds in hospitals, lack of lots of medical devices, such as ventilators in hospitals. So lots of lockdowns, many things were affected, whether health organizations, economy of lots of countries were affected. So police had to get in and do their job. Now, the police, whether they were in frontline or as a backup for those health sectors. I'd like to introduce our guest speakers. We've got Major General from Dubai, Major General Abdullah Al-Ghaithi. So Major General Abdullah Al-Ghaithi is Head of General Department of Protective and Security Emergency, Head of the Crisis and Disaster Management Team at Dubai Police. I'd like to welcome Major General Abdullah Al-Ghaithi. Good evening, Your Excellency.
I think there is some missing, or something has happened. I think something missing, stop contact between us, or something happened. Okay.
Can you hear me, Your Excellency?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to welcome our guest as well from the States. We've got Mike Becker, Executive Director of International Organization of Training and Public Safety Personnel. I'd like to welcome you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
And Mr. Rick Moya from the UK, Police Foundation Policing Think Tank. I'd like to welcome you as well, sir.
Hi, hello.
And I've got Major Gerardina Corona from Carabinieri Police Headquarters, Italy. I'd like to welcome you, sir. Ms. Major.
Can you hear me right now?
Yes.
Can you
Yes,
hear me?
I can hear you. Yes. And we've got Mr. Paul Griffith, President of Police Superintendent from the UK.
Hello, good afternoon from England.
Good afternoon. Now, I'd like to, basically, we'll start with 10 to 15 minutes for each speaker, and then we'll open the floor for discussion. So I'll start with Your Excellency, Major General, Dubai. We'll see what Dubai did and how they faced the actual pandemic. So we will go to Dubai, since I'm being in Dubai as well.
Thank you, Doctor. Okay, first
I
want to welcome everyone to attend us with this webinar session, and in this time we should have very good experience from other friends from different headquarters. Then I will start talking by Arabic. For me, it is better or more comfortable for me. ببدأ حديثي دكتور باللغة العربية. في البداية أبغى أتقدم بالشكر الجزيل للإدارة العامة للريادة والتميز على إتاحة الفرصة للإدارة العامة لأمن الهيئات والمنشآت المشاركة في برنامج أفضل التطبيقات. وهذا البرنامج اللي يساعدنا على أساس كسب المعرفة والخبرة من الدول المتقدمة، وخاصة في الفترة اللي مرت جائحة كورونا التي خلقت حقيقة مشكلة كبيرة، وخلقت أيضا عبء كبير على القيادات الشرطية في الفترة اللي مرت، وما زالت أنا أقول العبء مستمر والتحديات ما زالت مستمرة. فبترك لك الموضوع على أساس دكتور ممكن تواصل وياهم تترجم لهم الكلام على أساس ممكن.
His Excellency is going to speak in Arabic, but he's got a presentation which is in English. While he's speaking, if you've got any question, I can just translate it into English. So I think His Excellency is going to start his speech now, please.
فاليوم بنتكلم حقيقة كانت لنا الأسبقية، وكان بتوجيهات سيدي معالي القائد العام لشرطة دبي الأخذ في الأسبقية في عمل لجنة أو فريق أزمات والكوارث الداخلية بشرطة دبي.
So basically, as you see, this is a slide which shows that we had two teams. His Excellency was an intermediate between an internal team and external team. So we had an internal crisis and disaster team, and he was the leader of that team. At the same time, we had an external crisis and disaster team, which was led by a higher rank. But His Excellency, yeah.
وطبعا مثل ما شايفين هذا الهيكل التنظيمي اللي تم تشكيله، طبعا كان هناك في اسبقيه في وضع او في تشكيل فريق الازمات والكوارث الداخليه اللي اصدرها سيدي معالي القائد العام لشرطه دبي، وتم تشكيل هذا الفريق من الرئيس والمنسق الاداري والمنسق العام، ايضا في منسق اعلامي، بالاضافه الى الفرق الرئيسية المهمة كفريق الطبي الإداري وفريق المروري، الفريق الأمني، فريق التعقيم والتطهير، وفريق التقني، وفريق التجهيزات والعزل والحجر، وفريق الفني، وفريق الآليات.
So basically, this is the structure of the internal crisis and disaster team. What happened, the idea of coming up with this team in order to get a backup for an external team. Now, Dubai Police decided to act as a country, and basically they considered each department as being a city. So therefore, what they did, they imitated the strategy which was decided in the city of Dubai to imitate that kind of strategy within the organization of Dubai Police. And as you see, those sectors, so we had the medical team, we had the admin team, and we had the logistics as well. So the structure is in front of you.
أيضا حقيقة شكل هذا الفريق لحماية قوة شرطة دبي أو مرتب قوة شرطة دبي والممتلكات والثكنات والمطاعم وكل ما يختص بالممكنات أو القيادة العامة لشرطة دبي، حفاظا على أفرادها، بحيث أن هذه الأفراد هم الخط الدفاع الأول لمواجهة فيروس كورونا كوفيد 19.
So as you know, as the pandemic, one of the challenges that coronavirus, the rate of transmission is so high. So even Dubai Police employee, they were part of the front line. So the challenges, one of the challenges that Dubai Police faced was basically the affection of their employee. So therefore, they had to have their own strategy in order to protect them all. And if any problem occurred, they had to act immediately, and they had to go basically on their plans and start plan B. So the challenge was to keep every department or police station active and not to lose our employee. Because as we know, the spread of the virus is very quick. We have lots of challenges, lack of hospital beds, lack of isolation, and the strategies that we get from WHO based on based on isolating, even whether quarantine or isolation. That's another challenge of losing people in the front line. So we had to deal with our employee in a clever way in order to protect them.
على الأساس قمنا بتشكيل استراتيجية لمواجهة خطر فيروس كورونا بوضع آلية معينة كحماية الموظفين وممتلكات مثل ما ذكرنا في بداية الأمر. البند الثاني هي تقييم المخاطر الإصابات التي قد تحصل لمرتب القوة. البند الثالث تقييم وتطهير المباني والأماكن المهمة تابعة للشرطة. التواصل الفعال بشأن المصابين، وهذا كان من النقاط المهمة، أن كيف أنت تقدر تتواصل مع مرتبك وكيف تتواصل معهم بحيث أنك تشكل خلية تواصل مهمة جدا. أيضا الأدوار والمسؤوليات تجاه كل فريق في البرنامج نفسه. أيضا كان لابد أن نضع لنا مؤشر مهم لنقيس نفسنا أو نقيس عملنا مقارنة مع الدول الثانية. حطينا نسبة الإصابات بفيروس كورونا بعد ما شفنا أن أو خذنا قارنا نفسنا مع دول قريبة جدا منا من حيث الأعداد والقوة، فبالتالي حطينا نسبة معينة 4.2 خلال فترة الإصابة بفيروس. الثاني نسبة النجاح في حالة الكشف المبكر بنسبة 100%. لابد أن يكون عندنا كشف مبكر لحالات الإصابات. الشيء الآخر حطينا نسبة نجاح في تنفيذ الإجراءات الوقائية المقررة بنسبة 100% بالنسبة لمرتب أو بالنسبة للعاملين في القيادة العامة للشرطة.
So the slide is so clear, but what I wanted to clarify here that within the team, the teams decided, since I'm being part of the team, medical team, they decided on a mass screen within the organization of Dubai Police, and we had a KPI of 4.2. So when we started our mass screen, rate of infection was not, it did not reach 4.2, it was less than 4.2. And our aim was to have safe building, to protect our employee and to build up a safely environment within the organization of Dubai Police itself.
لهذا كان اللي توجب علينا حاليا أن نضع موازنة لهذا الفريق المشكل، وأيضا نعمل إجراءات لهالمشتريات، لأن أنت في النهاية تبغي تحمي مرتبك، تبغي تحمي أفرادك بحيث أنهم خط الدفاع الأول، فبالتالي لابد أن يكون هناك موازنة لهذا الفريق. عمل إجراءات للمشتريات، توعية والتدريب أيضا لابد أن يكون موجود عندك. التقارير اليومية التي ممكن ترفعها من خلال هذه اللجنة عن الإصابات، عن الإجراءات، عن الأمور المتخذة، عن المشتريات بالنسبة لمعالي القائد العام والمعنيين في الأمر. أيضا التواصل المستمر الفعال بين أعضاء الفريق في إدارة هذه الأزمة. أيضا تخصيص فرق عمل للنزول للميداني لمتابعة هذه الفرق التي تعمل في الميدان. الاجتماعات اليومية التي كانت موجودة، وكان عندنا اجتماعات يومية مستمرة وأحيانا قد توصل لاجتماعين في اليوم. أيضا متابعة القرارات التي تصدر وكيف تم تنفيذها، وهل يتم تأخير في عملية التنفيذ، بالإضافة إلى التقارير العملية والمحاور والتجارب، وعمل مقارنات مرجعية وأخذ الاستشراف من الجهات المعنية على أساس نشوف نفسنا وين نحن موجودين، بالإضافة إلى التنبؤات والإحصائيات اليومية اللي ممكن نطلعها عن الإصابة وطريقة كيفية يصيب الفرد، لأن أنتم عارفين كلكم رجال الأمن وعارفين وجود رجل الأمن في المقدمة. اليوم نحن ما نتكلم فقط عن موضوع كورونا، بل نتكلم عن الإجراءات الأمنية المتخذة على عاتق أفراد الشرطة، سواء كان في النزول الميداني لفرض السيطرة الأمنية في مناطق الاختصاص، بالإضافة إلى تواجد دوريات الشرطة في المناطق السكنية، في الأحياء السكنية، في الشوارع العامة، لأن كان لهم دور كبير. أيضا هناك حوادث تقع، لابد أخذ السيطرة وزمام الأمور في كشف هذه الحوادث. أيضا هناك جرائم تقع على فرد الشرطة أيضا، بالإضافة إلى عمله أن يقوم بعملية التقصي والتحري وأخذ الإجراءات الأمنية في هذا الجانب. أضيف إلى هذا الفرد أعمال أخرى إن شاء الله سنتحدث عنها لاحقا من خلال السلايدات القادمة.
Well, basically nothing to add here. His Excellency is showing the process which the team followed. The most important thing, there was a budget which was assigned for the actual team, and they had certain strategy to follow in order to basically not to fall back with their main role in the city of Dubai. So it was a backup team for their employee, for their families, and this team was a support team, and they were on 24 hours, 7 days a week. So this was the aim of the team. As we discussed earlier on, we as an intermediate, as His Excellency being a leader of the internal team, he had an external role, and he had to make sure that whatever goes from Dubai Police is 100% secure and safe and healthy.
وحقيقة سنعرج على بعض الإجراءات اللي قامت هذه الفرع فيها من خلال الهيكل التنظيمي، من ضمنها فريق التعقيم والتطهير. لو بنلاحظ من خلال بس لمجرد إجراءات سريعة أو كلمات سريعة، كيف قام هذا الفريق بعمل بعض الإجراءات. من ضمن هذه بعض الإجراءات توفير أجهزة فحص الحرارة في جميع منشآت القوة الموجودة وعلى مداخل الأماكن المهمة اللي يتطلب وجود أجهزة قياس الحرارة، إضافة إلى تأمين الغذاء بالنسبة للفريق أو المرتب الشرطة المتواجدين، لأن الوضع أصبح متغير، أن نسبة العمل في الميدان كان بنسبة أو فترات أطول. أيضا توفير المواد التعقيمية بالنسبة لأفراد الشرطة، وبالنسبة للمطاعم، بالنسبة للثكنات والأماكن المهمة اللي تواجد فيها مرتب الشرطة، الدوريات، أماكن اللي تتطلب وجود أفراد الشرطة فيها، إيجاد أدوات الوقاية المهمة اللي هاي كانت فعلا يمكن أكثر جهات العالم كانت تشكي منها، لتوفير الكمامات، توفير القفازات، توفير المعقمات، توفير الملابس الوقائية الخاصة بمرتب القوة. وأخيراً أيضاً توفير بعض الخيم اللي ممكن نستطيع أن أو وفرت فيها جميع هذه الخدمات لعمل موقع راحة لبعض الأفراد أثناء تواجدهم في المناطق الخارجية وفي الطرقات. إضافة إلى ذلك أيضاً قمنا بعملية تعقيم المركبات والوحدات التنظيمية، تعقيم اليومي للمباني، وأصبحت عملية مستمرة لفترة 3 أشهر على عاتق فريق التعقيم والتطهير.
His Excellency explained about the effect of new policies, especially which was recommended by the World Health Organization. They were basically the most important thing within a new practice, basic to practice. Now our practice is completely new. We need to train our staff. We need to make sure that everybody has got a good distance between him and between his colleague. So we had to reassure that a new practice is based on distancing. New practice is based on performing protective measures, especially by wearing masks, by sanitizing their hands and washing them regularly, sanitizing your surroundings. So in order to avoid transmission of viruses from one person to another. So as we know that we've got lots of, our practice is based on groups. So we had to make sure that we have basically sufficient distance when we practice our daily routine work. Even we had to lower the capacity of our buildings from 100% to 30%, and then we went up to 50%. I think we, until today, we are operating our buildings on 50% capacity.
دكتور، بالإضافة إلى أن نحن قمنا بعملية دعم الجهات الثانية، مش فقط أفراد الشرطة والأماكن الخاصة بالشرطة، بل قمنا بدعم جهات أخرى خارجية وتقديم الدعم اللازم لهذه الجهات.
So we had other departments or other organizations within the city of Dubai, which we had to help and basically stay with them as one team. The main aim of being together is to keep Dubai safe, secure, healthy.
نعرج للفريق الآخر والفريق المهم جدا اللي هو فريق العزل الطبي. هذا الفريق حقيقة لعب دور كبير في عملية توفير أماكن للعزل وأماكن للحجر، توفير أو متابعة توفير الطاقم الإداري اللي كان موجود، عمل شراكة بين الجهات الخاصة والجهات الحكومية. يمكن كان عندنا نحن شوية خصوصية في عملية أن يكون لمرتبنا خصوصية في حالة إصابة بعض المرتب أو بعض الأفراد بإصابات إيجابية، بحيث أن يكون لهم خصوصية، لهم أماكن حقيقية، يعني أماكن خلينا نقول خاصة، نوفر لهم يعني أكثر أماكن للراحة، وذلك بالتنسيق مع بعض المستشفيات. مثل ما أنتم شايفين من خلال السلايد، كان تنسيق بين عدة مستشفيات لتوفير أفضل أماكن للعزل لمرتب الشرطة، بالإضافة إلى توفير فنادق والتنسيق مع الجهات الخارجية، وتوفير أيضا الفنادق هاي مجهزة كأنها مستشفيات لتوفير الراحة التامة بالنسبة لمرتب الشرطة.
Well, His Excellency, now he's highlighting the role of the medical team. So as you see, it was a proactive work. Maybe some of you see lots of logos of different private hospitals and hotels. Basically, the hotels were used as isolation, and they built up and were managed by private sectors and government sector. So within Dubai Police itself, we built up a partnership relation between private sector, health sectors, government, other government health sectors, and different hotels as well, to come up with isolation centers led by group medical team. So plus we had quarantines as well. Quarantine building was completely different, led by completely separate team. And then we had an admin group which looked and which provided all the logistics needed for the medical team. So the whole team were together, and they just worked as one cell in order to give a proper service for Dubai Police employee.
بالإضافة دكتور، يعني نحن كان عندنا فريق تقصي، وهذا الفريق التقصي حقيقة فريق التقصي الطبي اللي كان يقوم بعملية التقصي عن المرتب بالكامل، كيف تتم عملية فحص المرتب، كيف تتم عملية إذا كان هناك في مخالطة، كيف تتم عملية إذا كان شخص مصاب، فبالتالي هذا الفريق لعب دور كبير أيضا في متابعة أفرادنا. واليوم أنا لما أتكلم عن مرتب شرطة دبي لا أتكلم فقط عن الفرد العسكري، بل أتكلم عن جميع مرتب الشرطة المدني والعسكري، حتى الموظفين المدنيين الموجودين، حتى الطبقة العمالية العاملة في الخدمات الموجودة في شرطة دبي، بالإضافة إلى الجهات الخارجية اللي تقوم بعملية دعم ومساندة الشرطة. أيضا قدمنا لها خدمة من خلال هذا الفريق، فريق التقصي.
So His Excellency, what he mentioned, the role of the operation room. The operation room worked as a screening team, and they directed most of team members where to go, how to respond. And basically, after our mass screening and coming up with a dashboard and building up all the statistics, the screening team had a big role, and they directed whether the isolation team or the quarantine team or the admin team, they were, as we considered, I mean, basically the screening team was considered as the heart of the team itself. During this pandemic, we had to look after every single member in Dubai Police, regardless of their rank, regardless of their position. We looked after them. We looked after their families, family members. So we tried to look after every single person, every single employee in Dubai Police organization, or even sometimes those who are outside Dubai Police and who are seeking help. We just tried as much as possible to provide them with our medical services.
أني إلى الشريحة هذه تبين لنا حقيقة الفريق الإداري، الطبي الإداري اللي قام حقيقة بجهد جبار في تجهيز مباني الحجر، وأيضا يعني النظر إلى عدد المصابين، إلى الموظفين، تجهيز أماكن الحجر بأفضل وسائل الراحة والبرامج. وحتى يعني اليوم وفرنا الأفراد بحيث أن تدري أنت اليوم لما تيجي وتحجر الشخص في مكان لابد أن توفر له نوع من الراحة، نوع من الطمأنينة. فبالتالي كان دور الفريق الإداري دور كبير في عملية تجهيز برامج، تجهيز أماكن يعني سبل الراحة بالنسبة للفرد اللي بيكون موجود في هذا العزل، من مواد غذائية، من مواد تعقيم، من طلبات، إضافة إلى النظر إلى جهات أخرى كالسجل المركزي. شو بحكم أن السجل المركزي أيضا يتبع القيادة العامة لشرطة دبي، بالتالي كان هناك دور هذه الفرق أن تدعم أيضا العاملين في السجل المركزي، وتوفير أيضا التجهيزات اللازمة للسجناء بالتنسيق مثل ما ذكرت مع الجهات الخارجية، وتوفير أفضل السبل لراحة الموظفين وراحة السجناء.
ها دكتور. Okay. Now the thing is, Major General has highlighted again the role of the team was to provide the quarantine, because basically the protocols and guidelines of WHO was whomever was in contact with positive cases to be quarantined for 14 days. So we had to come up with our own quarantine setting with high-class buildings in partnership with other organizations, as you see, Emirates Airlines, Wasl Properties, Dubai Municipality. At the same time, we had a role to look after the prisoners as well, to implement our strategy and implement our protocols within the central prison to basically to make sure that every single staff in Dubai Police Central Prison is safe, and the safety of our prisoners as well.
أنا دكتور ما أبغى أطول عليكم، ويمكن هاي تكون الشريحة الأخيرة الموجودة عندي. أنا أتكلم بس بسرعة على الفريق التقني اللي حقيقة قام بتجهيز أيضا أشياء مهمة كالخوذة الذكية، بوابات ذكية اللي ممكن تستخدم في مداخل مراكز الشرطة والقيادة، بالإضافة إلى كاميرات حرارية وأجهزة حرارية. ولا ننسى أيضا دور هالفرق كلها في عملية تقديم الدعم لأصحاب الهمم وكبار السن وأهالي الموظفين، بحيث أن نخلي الموظف حقيقة لا يشعر بخوف على ذويه وهو موجود على رأس عمل. هذا شيء مختصر بالسريع. أنا أدري أن أخذت وقت كبير في هذا الموضوع، لأن اليوم إذا تكلمنا عن موضوع كورونا الموضوع يأخذ وقت طويل وأشياء كثيرة يمكن ما ذكرناها من خلال هذا العام.
His Excellency, now basically within this slide, he's trying to show up the role of basically other technical teams. He just spoke about the safety measures which was taken in certain police stations, such as thermal cameras. For those whom entered the buildings of police stations, they had to go through smart gates in order to screen them. And this was his final slide. And he's just, his apologies for taking such a longer time. And I think we will, so thank you very much, Your Excellency. We leave the questions after we hear from the others from different parts of the world. I think I need to go to the States, to Mr. Mike Bicker, the Executive Director of International Organization of Training Public Safety Personnel. Yes, sir. You can start.
Get it on mute. Thank you. It's morning here, actually 6 o'clock in the morning, so I'm still drinking my coffee, trying to wake up. Yeah.
You need to boost yourself with caffeine.
There you go. I'm probably not the best one to talk about the law enforcement response because we're not a law enforcement agency and our members are not law enforcement agencies, but we're training academies. My organization is the International Association of Directors of Law Enforcement Standards and Training. We shorten that and just call it IATLS. And it's made up of the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commissions in the 50 states of the United States, as well as close to 700 law enforcement academies. So I can talk very well on what's happening with the training academies. Not so much law enforcement, other than what I hear in the news, and probably most of you have heard it as well. I can tell you that the United States pretty much shut down in March and April. Most businesses were closed except for essential businesses like grocery stores, gas stations, and so forth. But our economies took a real hit. And many small businesses are going out of business because of that. They can't recover. So we're starting to gear back up. The problem with that is that COVID-19 is spiking, and it's greater than ever right now. So we're still trying to deal with that. But as far as the academies, during that shutdown in March and April, most of the training academies also shut their doors to try to comply with the state mandates of non-essential businesses and try to protect the students. We've started opening up in May and June. They had to suspend the rules for certification and licensing. In the United States, when an agency hires someone to be a law enforcement officer, they have a period of time in which to get certified, to go through the academy and get certified. They had to extend that period of time because of the lockdown. We also have certification on things like first aid that was expiring. They had to extend those things. When they started back up, we had to limit the class size. Some academies bring in 50 students, some of them over 100 students at a time. They had to cut that way down to about 30 students at a time. And then even at that small number, when they were in the classroom, in order to social distance, they had to put them in 2 or 3 classrooms and then broadcast the instructor into the various classrooms. They tried to increase the airflow. If they couldn't have most of the activities outside, they opened windows, they opened doors to get more airflow into the classrooms. They did temperature checks multiple times a day, at least when the students first arrived in the morning, again at noon or after lunch. And if they had practicals, many times they did temperature checks before and after the practicals. They installed a lot of touchless hand sanitizers throughout the facility, but they also had to build in extra time into the training just for things like hand washing, because every time they touched anything, every time they interacted, they had to go and wash their hands. And so that cut into the instruction time. They had to provide cloth face coverings when social distance wasn't required or wasn't able to do social distance. And then they had to wash these face coverings daily back in their dormitory rooms. They had to limit the people coming into the facility, so friends and relatives could not visit. They had to limit outside role players. When they do practical situations, they usually hire people to come in and role play. If it's a domestic dispute, they might have a man and woman role play that. They had to quit bringing in outsiders and train their staff to handle all those activities. They had to not only do more hand washing, things like that, but they had to wash their equipment every time it was used. If they were doing practicals and they were handcuffing, every time the handcuffs were used, they had to wash them and clean them and sanitize them. If they were doing defensive tactics and they had padded suits on, those had to be sanitized and washed. They even had to bring extra change of clothing so that once they did the practical exercises, they changed their clothes before they went back into the classroom. They started keeping the same partner during exercises. Many times, if you have a class of 30 students and they're doing practical exercises, they alternate partners so that you get a sense of what it's like to try to handcuff someone with big arms or small arms, or that's taller than you or shorter than you. They couldn't do that anymore. They had to keep the same partner for safety reasons. They had to lock the facility down so that students could not go home on the weekends. If they were in the dormitories, they had to stay there because they were afraid that if they went back, then they were exposed and they would bring COVID-19 back. The dormitory rooms, they had to reduce those to single rooms. Some dormitory rooms are 2 people to a room. Some are as many as 4 people to a room. They had to cut that down so it was only single people in a room, and as much as possible, a single restroom. Cafeterias closed. They had to deliver the meals into open spaces such as a range or something of that nature where they could social distance and eat their lunch. They had to install plexiglass shields over reception areas and any place where they interacted with the staff. Increased cleaning and sanitizing of all services, of course, that everyone's doing. And some states allow retired law enforcement officers to come back if a law enforcement agency has several people affected and they need extra people. The retired law enforcement officers under the law could not come back and work because it would jeopardize their pension. So they had to relax those laws so that those people could come back and fill in for officers that were short without interfacting their pensions. So that's some of the things that are happening with the academies. They are gearing up now. They are smaller than usual. It's a new normal for us. And we're also dealing with the increased COVID-19 cases throughout the United States. And in some cases, I think we're facing another lockdown where they're going to start closing businesses. We're starting to go backwards on opening up many of the states. So again, I can't talk too much about the law enforcement agencies because we're not our members are not law enforcement agencies, but academies. But hopefully that information is helpful.
Thank you very much. Let me just throw one question here.
Yes.
Basically, as here, I mean, in Dubai, we had lots of challenges. We had 200 different nationalities. That means we have 200 different cultures. So we had lots of impacts by locking down the city. The thing is, the psychological impact on lots of people here within different cultures. Now the thing is, we had to get in and try to look after them, because the response in certain cultures, some of them, they try to break up their lockdown because we had to quarantine certain areas, but psychologically they were affected. So in the States, locking down the States, even though the United States is a huge land, so deciding of locking them down after having an active lifestyle into a passive lifestyle, and the effect of, as a psychological effect on them. So for sure, you had to get in and change certain strategies in order to protect them for not getting into psychological problems in future. So did you have, basically, did you change any policy for the future? I know the classes went down, the number of classes went down. Will this stay forever, or will you open it up and things go back to normal? And when we say things go back to normal, now, will normal be the same as before COVID, or it will be different normal?
I'm sure it'll be a different normal. I don't know that anytime soon we'll go back to normal until they get a vaccination and eliminate COVID-19 for the most part. I think our normal is going to be very different. But on the different cultures, I can't speak too much about how the law enforcement agencies dealt with them, but I do know that they were affected differently. That especially a lot of our migrant workers that are Hispanic, we were seeing an extremely high rate because they were not receiving protection equipment. Many of them didn't speak English, and so in many senses they weren't getting the word from the news media. And then news media was a problem as well, because when this first hit, they kept talking about the elderly were dying, the people that had different health issues, and especially the elderly, if they were 60 years old or older, it was pretty much fatal for them. And so the young people thought that they were immune, and so they were going to the beaches, they were partying, and now it's spreading amongst the younger people. So the news media has caused a real problem. The information back and forth, I know when it first started, they were talking about don't use face masks because the N95 masks have to be saved for the hospital people because we had a shortage of masks. And so the word got out not to use face masks, and now they're trying to mandate or at least encourage people to wear masks. And so there's a lot of misunderstanding. A lot of people think, well, the masks aren't doing any good. Why should we wear them? And it's just contributing to the increased cases, I think. So there's just a lot of misinformation out there, not only among the different cultures, but amongst young people, elderly people. And then as you're probably seeing in the news media, we're having a tremendous amount of social unrest right now, rioting and demonstrations and things like that because of the actions of a few law enforcement officers that were exceeded use of force. But I think just in my mind that some of that is frustration from the people from being locked down for so long, and now they're reacting in a very poor way with the rioting. So, and I know much of it is blamed on police brutality, the actions of a few but I think some of it could be attributed to just the unrest from the lockdowns.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bika. So we will go to the UK, Mr. Paul Griffiths.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon for us, anyway. Poor old Mike, it's very early in the morning. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity just to discuss our perspective on COVID-19 and law enforcement. As you can imagine, like everybody else, it's a health and economic emergency of a scale that we've never seen before. We've got lots of pandemic plans in place. We've got civil contingencies in place across the country, and local resilience forums to actually work in relation to natural disasters and pandemics, etc., but not on the scale by which we were faced. It caused us as a police service, we work with 55 different police forces across England and Wales, and also connect up with Scotland, Northern Ireland as well. So we're also responsible for the British Overseas Territories. And one positive that did come out of this was there was a lot more cohesion across all the separate organisations, but it was a bumpy ride to get there, if I'm honest. Most major incidents, we set up a gold, silver and bronze command structure. Usually it's within a particular force, but on this occasion it was national. So we had the chair of all the chief constables chairing the gold meeting, and obviously under that there was silver and bronze meetings, which all feed into all the different aspects that we had to face. If I just cover off a few areas that we were obviously very concerned about in the very early stages, and I don't think the reality really hit the police service until the Prime Minister's announcement of the full lockdown. We've got a very liberal society, I would suggest, in the United Kingdom, and that was something that we hadn't faced probably since World War II. So it sent shockwaves, I think, to a certain degree across the whole of the British community. But then it was about what would be the impact of this. We were watching great things from Italy in the weeks coming up, but still I felt that we hadn't really embraced ourselves and prepared ourselves well enough for what was inevitable coming our way. But some of the key issues that we focused on as a police service was first of all the safety and well-being of our own staff. If we can't protect our own staff as best as possible, then clearly we're going to hinder ourselves in terms of policing across the United Kingdom. Very early on, the usual absence rate across the police service is approximately 3%, but within a few weeks we'd risen to 17% across the whole of all the different police services. Now that's a lot of people. That's about 43,000 who were either self-isolating, sick, or absent, or shielding, or caring for individuals. So there was a slight concern, if I'm honest, that if that trajectory continued, then we would have significant resilience issues across the country for policing. But that 17% ended up being the peak of absence from the police service, and every week it continued to drop, and it is currently about 6.5% across the whole country. Some of that was relating to confidence. Some of it was about working arrangements. So one of the great things that did happen was the technology paradigm shift that we went through, where a lot of people were able to continue their work from home. So I think that was one of the benefits that did come from the circumstances that we found ourselves. And even all the key meetings, I mean, we meet here on this webinar across many different countries, but it wasn't the way that policing really worked in the United Kingdom until the paradigm shift occurred. And I think that's a benefit that we will take from the tragedy that's hit us all globally. So the resilience was sound, but we were worried about the demand. So, looking back on it now, the initial lockdown, which appeared severe at the time, naturally had an impact on the demand on police services in many ways. So what we saw was a fall in the number of emergency and non-emergency calls. Approximately 16 to 20% of the calls dropped, but we started to see a significant increase in online reporting to us. And it'd be interesting to watch actually whether this connectivity between the public and the police via the online services continues, because it is actually partly useful for us from a digitalization perspective and a self-service perspective. But there were drops in the calls naturally. Other predictable stuff is that obviously acquisitive crime fell quite dramatically. So crime in total, and we're quite precious over our crime recording processes. But our crime recording showed a 28% drop in crime across the whole of the country. Now, it's quite predictable where the crime dropped. It was around burglary, vehicle crime, acquisitive crime, etc. But the big concern for many was safeguarding and vulnerable people. So we were very worried about domestic abuse situations and those people that relied on social networks or schools or teachers for their own safety and connectivity. We were desperately worried that we'd actually, with the restrictions, actually cut that opportunity off for individuals. And that instigated a lot of initiatives all over the country in different ways, whether it was advertising safe lines to ring via waste disposal processes, or any sort of contact through pharmacies or supermarkets, and then using technology to open up different forums for those people who actually felt, whilst home is a safe haven for many, it's not for quite a chunk of our society. And it was making sure that we could actually reach out to those individuals and continue to provide a service. And we certainly exploited the media in terms of identifying some very positive action in the West Midlands, where officers were continuing with their duties to safeguard individuals irrespective of the health emergency they were facing. But like many people, we were getting daily briefings on the escalating tragedy that was unfolding in terms of the amount of people that were dying. And you know, my own reflection is, I remember watching the tragedy unfold in Italy, and of course, the death rate soon reached us and started to escalate. So the other areas that obviously impacted on us as a service was the enforcement, and I think it did expose some issues for us in terms of consistency across the country. Very early on, there was inconsistent application of some of the powers, certainly some challenges. We were given fixed penalties out to individuals that breached any of the regulations for being outside. You know, it's something that the public weren't comfortable with, and actually the police weren't comfortable with because of the way that our society works. And there was different interpretations on the announcements and the law. So for the passage of law in our country, probably it can take up to a year to pass law. And what was happening was the Prime Minister was making announcements that everybody was almost reacting to immediately, sometimes even 48 hours before the law was enacted. And I think that created some problems, and Rick's nodding his head, and I'm sure he'd agree. It created some significant issues for many police forces in the interpretation of the difference between the law and health guidance and what is enforceable. But it took us a few weeks, but we got to some consistency, and over the weeks that followed, the amount of enforcement activity started to drop off. Personal protective equipment and testing was a big issue for the service. I have to say, it became an industry in its own right, getting gloves, masks, and protective equipment out to officers. We had to secure the assistance of the military to help us with our distribution. And we also had challenges with the supply chain because quite literally every agency wanted PPE. You know, I think there were a lot of ethical dilemmas for the public services about where kit was going. But policing seemed to get through. And, you know, we have had tragedies in our police service with deaths from COVID-19, but relatively small in the great scheme of the loss of life. So what we are starting to see now is a drop-off in the use of PPE by police. Now, some of this could be linked, no, these are only assumptions at this stage, but linked to the restrictions starting to ease, and there is a risk around potential complacency. And yet we all know the risks that are still out there. And the other challenge is we're starting to see a rise in COVID-19 cases in regions. So the government have just announced what they call is a sort of lockdown on the city of Leicester. But the reality is it's really difficult to enforce. And I think it's more of an appeal to people's consciousness and values than it will be for policing it. So hopefully that will give you an idea of some of the challenges that we've faced in policing, some of the issues that we've embraced over the last 3 months. And as you can see by my, I'm here back at home because I am still in lockdown trying to do my role from my home address. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, my question is, the UK had a different approach. Initially, they went with herd immunity, and then they decided to change their approach to lockdown. So what was the role of or police response in both approaches? And it was a quick shift from herd immunity approach to lockdown approach.
Yeah, it was. And we were all trying to follow the health advice, but you know, it was a monumentous moment for the country when the Prime Minister took that first public announcement to announce that we were officially going in lockdown. I think it was about 48 hours. I'm not sure whether Rick can remember this, but about 48 hours before the law actually came in. And we worked through the night with government officials as best we could to try and craft a law that we were just, you know, it was just such new ground for us. So as a police service, like the rest of the country, I think we were probably in a little bit of shock. And then we were trying to see what the pathway was from a little bit of chaos through to normality. So, you know, a lot of long hours, a lot of tired people, and a lot of efforts to try and get to some stabilisation once the Prime Minister had made the announcement.
So the other thing is basically the demonstration in the US was shifted to the UK as well. So what was the police response at that time? I mean,
so
to stop that, to stop them.
Yeah, and I think this is a really tricky area because we are very pro peaceful protest. You know, we're really supportive of it. You know, most of our policing values is on policing by consent and working with the public. And if they want to protest peacefully, then of course that's supported. And of course, the events in America are starting to unfold, and the ripple effects were obviously that it came over to the United Kingdom. And, you know, there are some, setting aside individual occurrences or incidents, there are some deep underlying issues of racism, bias and discrimination that we all need to face up to in terms of our country and public services and the police service. And we're very keen to try and work through some of the workforce representation issues. And so, you know, there was a moral issue about it was important for people to protest, and we wanted to enable that. But in most public order situations, crowd dynamics can change very quickly. And also there are times when peaceful protests can be hijacked by scores of individuals who are there for more aggressive means. And we did have occasions where the aggression started to come out very quickly, usually in some of the London demonstrations. And we also saw the toppling of a statue that was linked to slave trade. And that became quite a symbolic issue in the United Kingdom, basically causing us to reflect on where we stand and what we celebrate and what we shouldn't celebrate in relation to some of the discrimination and ill effects of our history. So it's created quite a debate in itself, but your question focuses on, we allowed for peaceful protest, obviously encouraged the health advice, but quite literally we were aware that it was A, unlawful according to our health regulations, but B, we're probably more challenging to try and stop it than to try and allow it and try and encourage health guidance.
So how did you protect high-rank officers from being affected by coronavirus? Did you have any policy, or did you have any strategy?
Everybody in the police service had the same sort of guidance over personal protective equipment and keeping 2 meters away from everybody, and obviously self-isolating immediately if you showed any signs or symptoms. I think what was concerning for us was the disproportionate fatality rates for those from the Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups across the country, and that was reflected in police service deaths as well. The impact on those that had underlying health issues and the impact on those over 55. So if you fitted any of those categories, there was a risk assessment in place to try and help and support those individuals in the workplace.
So the health, as we read in the news, and as they've announced that the health organizations in the UK were short of PPEs. So was the police as well short of PPEs?
I don't think we were short.
That was such a case.
No, I don't think we were short of PPE. I think there are a lot of people involved in getting the supply chains through and the distribution through worked really hard. And I don't think we ever went short. I think what some of the challenges we faced was making sure that it actually reached everybody, if you know what I mean. So there was enough kits in the system. This brings up the second question. How did you deal with all the rumors? Because, I mean, we heard it in the news. Certain news came out of certain hospitals or health organizations by individuals, but they weren't official announcements, but by individuals through social media. So even on their social media, there were officers that weren't getting the kit, and that was very early on, and we were quite rigorous about making sure that all the officers got the appropriate kit that they needed to conduct their duties. You're talking about some of the wider issues around sort of health fraternity and some of the stuff that was coming through on the media about them not getting the appropriate PPE. And it's really difficult for me to try and respond to that because I wasn't operating in those circles of health. But I think what emerged for us was social care, and the absence of PPE was quite a challenge and quite worrying as well.
Now, will training in police academy, will the strategies be changed, or will they stick to their sort of, I won't say an older style, but after COVID, things is completely different. We need to train them differently.
Well, here in England and Wales, the Prime Minister last year announced what he describes as a 20,000 uplift in police officers across the country. But what that means in real terms, when you build in all the retirement and those leaving, it's a recruitment process of 53,000 over 3 years, which by anybody's imagination is a real big challenge, but one that we're embracing and getting on with. But of course, that was announced and we started the end of last year. And of course, COVID has come along and it has, I would describe it as hindered, but it hasn't prevented us continuing on that path of recruitment. And of course, some of the economic challenges that we face in the United Kingdom, as many countries do, actually joining the police might be an attractive opportunity for some people who may not have quite considered it in the past. We moved a lot of stuff to digital and online to try and get around it, and some of the training is continuing, but obviously with the appropriate social distancing and washing, etc., and trying to keep people apart and do as much as possible through technology.
Thank you very much. We'll get back to you, sir. Now let's go to Italy. We'll go to Major Gerardina Corona from Italy. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon again from Rome. Thank you. Let me first of all convey a special thanks to our kind host from Dubai Police. It's an honor and a privilege to be part of this webinar today. The changed environmental context due to the COVID-19 pandemic, essentially conditioned by the stringent rules and of conduct issued, recalls the need to also adapt the adoption of new form of territorial control. So I will focus mainly on territorial control. Within this framework, Service must be primarily addressed to the action of reassurance, solidarity, and protection, which can altogether concretely contribute to strengthening of social cohesion. Basic protection services must be aimed at verifying compliance with the measures, thus soliciting with balance and sensitivity the responsible adhesion of the population, also through the exercise of assiduous information activities. Public order and safety activities must be particularly oriented towards emergency and rescue intervention. Within the transition to the so-called phase 2 of the containment measures, the Ministry of Interior has directed the action of police forces towards a different way. First of all, the resumption of criminal activities, the assembly, aggregation, bans, and more generally to the compliance with anti-COVID social distancing measures. In this context, the following services are distinguished. General prevention, aimed at containing the possible resurgence of crime. Public order, for the management of health emergency through targeted controls aimed at verifying compliance with the measures to prevent the spread of contagion. Therefore, provincial commanders who serve all around the country, even in small cities, must refer to the provincial committees for public order and safety to identify the needs for services aimed at complying with prevention and containment measures of the risk of contagion from COVID-19, providing in these locations, as usual, its own qualified contribution in regard to the institutional role in the centers where the Carabinieri is the only police force. Provide for the participation of a representative in the technical tables that may be necessary for sharing the implementation methods and related public order services. Intensify the general prevention services to be arranged with one's own programming in relation to the phenomena of common and widespread crime, also taking into account the coordinated control plans of the territory adopted in coordination with other police forces in Italy. At the same time, with the progressive reopening of economic and production activities, the prefects are called to verify the implementation in the workplace of the precautionary measures to contain the contagion, indicated in the protocol signed between the government and the social partner of March 2020, using the police force. In this context, the provincial commanders, in the exercise of their functions, must convene targeted info operational meetings with the division of special units for the planning of monitoring action regarding the regularity of employment norms and the implementation of the envisaged precautionary measures to contain contagions in workplace. Consequently, promote the initiative with the prefects, enhancing the institutional skills in the specialist sectors, also with the participation of the heads of the operating units of various functional organizations in the Provincial Committee of Order and Public Safety. The epidemiological situation has led to the contraction of the most common crimes, with the growing attention of crime emerging. On immediate financing for individual and small, medium-sized enterprises operating in the tourism hotel, restaurant, waste, health, and agri-food sectors, allowing them to restart absorbing profits and at the same time acquiring new consensus among the population. In the world of public contracts, taking advantage of the possible simplification of bureaucratic obligation, given the need to restart the economic system in short times. In identifying new strategies for the marketing of the narcotic drug, e-commerce, and home delivery. In this context, a permanent monitoring and analysis body has been set up at the Central Directorate of the Criminal Police of the Ministry of the Interior, made up of representatives of the police forces in which to bring together, in compliance with the operational autonomy of each of them, methodologies and information elements and sector best practices in order to direct strategies for preventing and combating the infiltration of crime in the legal economy, also internationally. The observatory makes use of the contribution provided fortnightly by the provincial commands and the special department of the Carabinieri. The Special Investigation Group, also called ROS, and the provincial commands must therefore direct the prevention and contrast activities in accordance with the renewed criminal dynamics connected with the health emergency, making extensive use of the channels of cooperation, periodically updating the threat framework. The Operations Center, in addition to exercising its role of coordination and control of all the general prevention activities carried out in the area, actively participates in the fundamental action of social reassurance, guaranteeing citizens and assiduous and punctual information activity. In this regard, the operator must have a vademecum for the Ministry of Interiors and question issued by the Prime Minister Office, where to find the answer to be provided to citizens divided into thematic areas, avoiding to direct the user in search of information through the internet. In the case of email contacts, use the format available by the Public Relations Office to be adapted to the actual citizen request. If the application does not fall within the case history drawn up by the Presidency of the Council of Ministers, invite the citizen to make contact with the nearest Carabinieri station, also in order to check for the presence of further local directives. The stringent prophylaxis measures adopted within the national territory resulted in the lower flow of citizens to the offices of the Carabinieri and the simultaneous need to increase the external protection of the departments, functional to the control of compliance with the provision issued by government and by local bodies. Consequently, the provincial commander can, as an exception, redetermine the opening hours of Carabinieri station located all around the country, even in very small municipalities. Also by reducing the daily volume expected for the assigned range. The measure taken following a careful evaluation of the individual operating reality, given the primary purpose of welcoming the public reception service, which must always be guaranteed for each department, must be communicated in advance to the prefects and to the mayor of the municipalities concerned, specifying the temporary nature and purpose of the measure, then giving adequate information to the users. The military officer in charge for public reception interact with the users, also need in space equipped with boxes through the glass partition wall, taking care of their cleaning and at the end of the daily opening hours to the public. In location without boxes, primarily through the intercom system. If this contact is not sufficient to satisfy the need and the user does not wear a mask, officer in charge of public reception must wear a mask, taking care at the end of the daily opening hours to the public to sanitize the surfaces and the office furniture concerned. In any case, if it is necessary to limit the flow of citizen access to waiting room and offices in order to guarantee the interpersonal distance of 1 meter. Place hand sanitizer, gel dispenser available to users. And it is appropriate to encourage and fully encourage the web compliance system as a valid tool to limit the length of stay inside the Carabinieri offices. These are the mainly operational procedures that Carabinieri adopted during this COVID period, but we are still adopting also during this second phases this operation operational issues that I already mentioned. So I think that for the future we will manage in this way till the situation will be going better, and even though the virus disappear, even though the virus will not appear again during the last autumn, and we hope it will not, of course. So thank you.
Thank you, Major Corona. Major Corona, the thing is, Italy was one of the first countries which was affected. And you had lots of challenges, shortage of beds, shortage of PPE. So basically, and the virus was around, and was the country was hit very badly by the virus. So how did you protect basically your staff? You mentioned certain steps as a social distancing, use of sanitizers and so on. But the thing is, it's very difficult to predict how this virus gets in and how it hits different individuals. But basically, as a frontliner, so how did you protect your? This is my first question. How did you protect your staff? Second question is, how did you work line by line with the health sector in Italy? Because most of the country, most of the states in the country were affected totally. And as we used to hear from different channels in the news, and again in social media, everything was locked down in Italy.
Yeah. As I told before, mainly we protect ourselves using a mask and individual equipment. So you told at the beginning Italy was locked down everywhere. So we cannot predict how the virus could be developed during the time. But if we join police, I think we join a threat. We don't know the threat. In this case, it was a virus, and it was and it affects health system. So I can answer maybe both questions you asked me. As police and as a person involved in the health system, we have to face different threats, and we cannot regret, and we cannot say no. It's unsafer for us. So I think that if the health system had a good answer, even though the virus was spread all around the country, mainly in the north of the country, it was because all the public system and the public answer was coordinated by the governmental authorities. So we protected ourselves firstly with individual equipment, and then try to face the threat, even if it was so difficult to understand where the enemies was. So, and secondly, we faced the virus near to the health system because it was necessary. Sometimes, especially at the beginning, all the medical doctor and the health system was not enough to face the threat. So the governmental authorities decided to involve also military, not only police forces, but also military, but maybe all around the world, everybody. So on TG, on TV images that military carried that person, and because it was a lot of people died. So that I don't know if I answered to your question, but that's what we did to manage this very critical situation.
Thank you, Major Cardina Corona. back to the UK with Rick Moya. So I think the floor is yours. But before, I've got certain question here. We've got lots of fans, football fans and horse riding fans as well. They want to go to the UK. So they are just looking forward and they're asking, is it safe? You've got certain challenges. So when will they be able to travel to the UK and support their teams or attend horse racing?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think anyone yet knows the answer to that question, I'm afraid. There are arrangements being made for certain countries for people to be able to come to the UK, but we're not yet opening up sporting events to large crowds. The football season has restarted, but without crowds. So we have the interesting spectacle of football matches with recorded sound of fans cheering instead of actual fans cheering. So I'm afraid it's all a bit unusual, but and I expect that it may be quite some time before those large gatherings are allowed again. This weekend, the pubs and restaurants are opening for the first time with social distancing rules. We'll see how that goes. It's going to be potentially quite an interesting weekend, maybe quite a difficult weekend for police colleagues, because as Mike was saying, there's probably a bit of pent-up frustration out there. People will probably want to go to the pubs and bars and so on. So we'll see how that goes. But I think it will be some time before we have kind of mass gatherings at football stadia and horse racing. It depends how the virus goes. And as Paul said, we've got this latest outbreak in Leicester where they've introduced what's been called a local lockdown, which is our first localized lockdown. And we may have more of those if we suddenly see spikes in particular locations. So it's quite uncertain when life is going to get back to normal, I'm afraid.
So basically, we've got lots of questions here, but I'll just leave the floor if you've got something to say, and then we'll open the floor for discussion.
Yeah, I don't want to repeat what Paul said. I mean, because he gave a really good overview of what the impact has been in England and Wales. I'll just say a few things. I'm not close to the operational side of it. I'm a researcher, so we do research on policing. So I'm speaking very much as an outsider, if you like, but someone who observes policing and works on policing. And I just wanted to highlight, first of all, some of the challenges which the police service had in responding to this and some of the ways in which they dealt with those. And then I was going to talk a bit about some of the things which enabled them to respond, I think, fairly effectively. And then I'll just finish by saying something about some good practice, which I think has come out of the experience. But I won't. I'll try and make it brief. So on the challenges, I mean, I think the first challenge was, of course, the speed and scale of what was required. Because normally, in terms of responding to a major disaster, if that's a flooding or some kind of natural disaster, that's normally a localized problem, or say it's a local public disorder issue. Then you have a local problem and you can respond by focusing on that locality. But what we had here was a challenge across the whole country, all at the same time and at very rapid speed. And that, I think, is an unprecedented situation from an emergency response and sort of major event point of view in the UK. And so that was a very serious and significant challenge. The speed, Paul talked about 48 hours between the announcement of the lockdown, then the introduction of legislation. And I think the speed did lead to some confusion around what powers the police had to enforce the lockdown rules. And specifically, there was a confusion between the guidance which the government issued, which was set out in the Prime Minister's statement, particularly rules around things like social distancing, which were guidance, and then what was in the legislation, which could be enforced by the police, which was around gatherings and having a reasonable excuse for leaving home. And there was some confusion, I think, around understandable confusion because of the speed with which the legislation was introduced. And that did lead to some fines being issued, which it subsequently turned out were not lawfully issued and so on. So a bit of confusion around that, but I think it's understandable given the speed with which policing had to respond. There were also some issues around localism, which Paul touched on, and we do have a very localized system of policing in this country, not as localized as the US system, but still, we've got 43 police forces in England and Wales, so a reasonable degree of fragmentation there. And that meant that you had forces doing slightly different things, taking slightly different approaches, and probably one or two forces maybe overreaching in terms of maybe where they, in terms of the tactics they used. And that led to some controversy in the media around maybe the police were going too far. Now, by and large, I think 95% of the police service didn't overreach and took a very policing by consent approach. But the problem is, if you get one or two places just going a little bit, maybe a little bit ahead of the public mood, then that can create a bit of concern. So I think there was, but those were in the early days, and then it bedded down. And I think there was very good guidance issued by the National Police Chiefs Council and the College of Policing, which set out the approach that police officers should take, which is very much not enforcement-led. It was very much about encouraging the public to comply, and then if people aren't complying, asking them to comply, and only as a last resort using police powers to enforce. And by and large, I mean, the enforcement, if you look at the figures, the number of fines has not been huge. I mean, given the scale of the task, it's been a relatively small amount of enforcement. But localism, I think, was an issue, and I think maybe led to some confusion as well among the public about what they were allowed to do and what they weren't allowed to do. So those were some of the challenges. Although I should say, I think broadly the response has been pretty successful. I think that, notwithstanding those issues, I think the police have responded pretty well to it and have coped with the situation remarkably well, actually. So I think it's been pretty good. Some things which might have facilitated the effectiveness of that response, I think, firstly, the support of the public is really important. And actually, the public overwhelmingly supported the lockdown because, people didn't think we had any choice but to support it for public health reasons. And so, in opinion polls, it was something like 95% of the public supported the government's approach to the lockdown, which is a remarkable figure for any policy. So there was overwhelming public support. And overwhelmingly, the public have complied with the regulations. And that's obviously really important, particularly with a policing by consent approach, which means that, most of the compliance is people voluntarily complying. And that worked very well. And that makes it easier for the police then to operate. And of course, there'll always be people who don't comply, and that has to be dealt with. But by and large, most people supported the rules and followed the rules, which was good. The other enabling factor, and Paul touched on this, was that other forms of demand on policing decreased. So the police had this increased task around enforcing and managing the lockdown. And then there was a drop in recorded crime, which Paul's already touched on, a drop in burglary, a drop in car crime, drop in many forms of violence, which is understandable given, people are stuck in their homes. So lots of crimes which might be committed outside of the home no longer could be committed. There were some increases, notably in cybercrime and fraud, and we've seen some big increases in the reports of that. We've seen some concern about the amount of online child sexual abuse, which has been reported to the National Crime Agency. And I think all of that reflects the fact that there is, criminals are not allowed on the street, but they can go on the internet. The public are not on the street, they are on the internet. And so more activity is online, more crime is taking place online. And I think that's a natural shift in demand. And it will be interesting to see whether, as Paul said, some of that cybercrime and so on continues, because clearly some of the organised criminal groups will have learned a lot during this process as much as the police have. The other area, of course, is domestic abuse, which Paul touched on. Of course, we have seen some signs that domestic abuse has increased. Again, you would expect that, given that people are locked in their homes, and that's obviously been a challenge. So a fall in a lot of recorded crime, but some shift into the online space and into the domestic space. I think the other facilitating factor, and Paul touched on this as well, is the good partnership framework that we have around responding to major events of this kind. So there is a fairly long-standing framework for emergency response, in which the police take the role as the lead agency and coordinate the efforts of other agencies, and that's always used with things like natural disasters, flooding, and so on. We've obviously never had anything like this in recent memory, but that partnership working seems to, from my perspective, seems to have worked pretty well, including at the local level, where, as Paul said, you have these local resilience forums bringing together the police, the fire service, the health authorities, the local councils, and so on. And that seems to have functioned pretty well. Two things just to finish on, which I thought have been examples of sort of innovation and good practice. One is obviously, again, Paul touched on this, the shift. I think that the COVID-19 has accelerated the shift to digital working within UK policing, and we've seen, lots more people working from home, the use of internet, some investment in new internet provision, in new IT provision by the police, which has been useful. As a researcher, we've actually found that police forces have been more willing to share information with us in a digital format. We normally get told we have to go to a police station to look at their computers if we want to look at some of their data sometimes. They've actually found ways of sending us stuff via email in a secure format now, which means we can carry out our work, which is very good. And I think that's a really useful example of policing maybe learning that you don't have to have all your data locked down in a police station to make sure it's secure, and that you can send it outside if you take precautions. And of course, we've had to do much more of that given the lockdown. So there's some positive signs in terms of digital transformation. And then the second one is around the proactive crime reduction work, which I think has taken place, because I know that police forces around the country have been doing a lot more proactive, because crime has fallen. They've had a bit more space to do some proactive work, particularly around organised crime, drug dealing, and those kind of issues. And we've had a bit of a spike in serious violence in the last few years here, linked to changes in the drugs market in England and Wales, and linked to international changes in the international drugs market. And we've seen the police go out and target some of the organised crime groups very proactively. And so I think that's been a really good use of the capacity which may have been released by the situation, which means that the police have been able to do some more proactive work around some of these offender groups, which hopefully will have a sort of a longer term impact. So I think that's been a very useful opportunity for policing to kind of get ahead of the game, particularly in relation to organised crime. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I've got now, I'll go to the audience questions. I've got a question to Mr. Becker from the States. I've got Stephanie. Her question is, were any of your police law or your law enforcement officers directed to limit their contacts with the public for minor violations during the COVID-19 pandemic? For example, in the United States, some agencies were directing their officers not to stop vehicles for minor equipment violations. If so, are your officers now making those contacts again? Or is there a plan to go back to normal operations? What criteria will you use to return to normal operations?
Thank you for the question. It's difficult for me to say specifically, again, because we're not a law enforcement agency, but I do know that during the crisis, law enforcement has tried to limit the interactions with people. So a lot of calls that they normally would send an officer to someone's home to take a report, they now do over the phone. There's a lot more of that. On traffic stops, I know during the lockdown there was very little traffic, but again, they're probably not stopping cars unless it's a serious violation to limit that contact. I think when they started releasing the lockdowns, many states were doing that in phases, as maybe restaurants would open, but bars wouldn't, and then bars opened, and then large gatherings couldn't, and so forth. As we got more traffic on the road, things started going back to normal, but now that the COVID is increasing significantly, I see maybe a little more backing off, and a possibility of more restrictions and maybe even lockdowns coming down.
Thank you. I've got a question for Mr. Griffiths. Number one, is it safe to travel to London today? This is one. Secondly, is there a real concern regarding second wave of COVID-19? So they just want to travel to London.
I know, they'll always be very welcome into London. It's like anywhere else, really. Obviously, the risk is still out there around catching COVID-19. The health guidance is there. So, of course, the travel arrangements will have to be considered around flying in, any quarantine that may be necessary or not. And then there's obviously the issue of the risk just going around to London of catching COVID-19. But of course, like everybody else, we've experienced it, and there's lots of provisions in place around a lot of our retail establishments, etc., to try and minimise the impact of transmission. So we're probably in a very similar position to most cities in Europe.
I need to go to Italy. I've got James, who asked, how much does it cost a country to lock down for at least a period of a month? I think since COVID-19, as it's written here, can only be effectively avoided through isolation. I believe by complete lockdown, COVID-19 can be defeated. Well, I can't, basically, it's very difficult to answer the question.
It is difficult to answer. It costs too much, I think, but it was necessary. Yeah. At the beginning, we didn't know how to face the threat because it was, as I told before, it was spread all around the country, maybe in the south, and there were many deaths. So, firstly, the governmental authorities sought to save people's lives. And it was the first topic that governmental authorities had to take care. Secondly, we needed to adapt our health system in the way to build new hospitals, also outside camp hospitals. So. Till this situation was not only so clear, but not so put like in a schedule on where you can find all right procedure. It was absolutely necessary to lock down everything in order to decrease the number of contagious. So it cost too much, but it was necessary, and we have to balance the different interests, as I told you. But at first, Italian authorities thought to take care of people's lives.
Okay, then I've got a question. This question comes from Yusuf Al-Ka'bi. It goes to Mr. Moya. Is he with us? I think he's got disconnected. So since he's not with us, then I need to get back to you, Mr. Griffiths, because the question was, from a security point of view, what kind of crimes will be expected to take place after COVID-19?
After COVID-19?
After COVID-19.
Yeah, so what we were prepared for is we were expecting an uplift in the amount of what we call safeguarding or public protection offences. So a lot of the worries that we had during the period of lockdown, where we were concerned about vulnerable people, their exploitation, their abuse, etc., their lack of connectivity with others, we were concerned that as the restrictions started to ease, actually those individuals would find those connections, make those reports, and there would be an increase in problems associated to that type of criminality. We're obviously starting to see some, drugs trafficking is continuing. Crime types have changed. So what we're uncertain of at the moment is whether those changes to crime types that occurred during the stricter end of the restrictions, whether many of those will continue or not. So, of course, a lot of the modern slavery type issues that we deal with seem to change. So people are getting placed into different environments to profiteer for their criminals. So I think we're still learning about what is the overall impact of the restriction on crime. But many of the sort of normal crimes types, such as your burglary, vehicle crime and violence, are starting to rise back to what would be pre-crisis period.
Thank you. Mr. Moya, this question comes from my side. Now, during COVID-19 pandemic, we had to work side by side with health organizations. Do you think certain strategies will change after COVID-19? Will we have new practice as a joint practice with other organizations other than police? Will we have something in similar along with different health organizations or other partners? Will we come up with new policing?
Well, I think, yes. I mean, I think it may have, as I say, improved some of the partnership working.
I think disconnected.
Technical.
It's a technical issue. Can I get this question to Sebeka? Can you answer the question, please?
Give me the question again.
The question is, during COVID-19, we had to work side by side with other organizations, such as health organization. So does that mean the practice of policing is going to change after COVID? Oh, he's back. I'm sorry, he's back.
Well, I'm sorry. I think I'm having some internet problems, I'm afraid. Occasionally, my children unplug the internet, which is occasionally.
I hope your internet was not hit by COVID virus.
No, yeah, I hope not. Yeah, I mean, well, just in response on the issue about health, I think there's good reasons to think that we need to start working collaboratively much more on a whole range of questions anyway. And so even before the pandemic, a lot of the challenges which the police are having to deal with, require a collaborative multi-agency response, whether that's dealing with mental health related issues, for example, or we have a big challenge in this country around the number of children who go missing, particularly from care homes. Issues like that require a collaborative response, and I think I would expect that to continue in the future. And so I think the case is very strong for more multi-agency working, and I guess the pandemic has perhaps given people a focal point for more sort of coordinated working.
I go to Italy, Major Corona. Basically the question comes from Shubhangi Patel. Did you all ever feel mentally pressurized at some point due to the burden of managing everything? If so, how did you manage? Basically, the whole scenario.
I couldn't hear you clearly.
Yeah, did you all ever,
the question?
Yeah, did you all ever feel mentally pressurized at some point due to the burden of managing everything? How did you manage? You had loads of things at one time. Lots of people were not ready for it. So as we know, I mean, health is going to get affected, especially mental health. It doesn't make any difference whether you work for police or you don't work for police. But during pandemic, mentally you get affected. And when you get pressurized, instead of going positive, you go negative. So did you feel that basically, especially with Italy, you had big problems and you had lots of cases, a shortage of bed, people were in the street, people were suffering, media everywhere. So definitely you were under pressure. But how did you manage that?
Of course, all countries were under pressure at the beginning because the situation was unbelievable. Firstly, unbelievable. After China, Italy was the second country in the world. But you mean as police force, as military police forces, and as I told you, military was involved during the crisis management since the beginning, because everybody knows that military has procedures to manage situation. It's clear that we have no procedure to face this pandemic, this threat. But we try to adapt those procedures and to manage at the first time the situation. So that's how we try to manage pressure and to manage mainly at the beginning also not only a medical problem but also, as you told, a mental problem, because people at the beginning was afraid and they didn't know about the future. So we have to manage different threats. And as I told you during my relation, I told you that mainly the police that works on the street had and has still to be reassuring towards people, mainly in order to make them not so afraid toward the situation during the first phase, but also right now during the second one.
Okay, so the question goes to Dubai, Your Excellency Major General. For Dubai Police, what organizational and administrative challenges was there in reallocating police from traffic police, tourism police, or other police departments, where the work dropped to help to other Dubai policing tasks, such as in Naif quarantine area? Excuse me, I'm just gonna ask that question in Arabic. سيدي السؤال كان كالآتي: كيف تم تزويدكم لبعض المراكز الشرطة، يعني مثل شرطة نايف كان في إغلاق لوك داون وكان في تزويد من الإدارات الباجية، كيف ضمنتوا سلامة عمل الإدارات الباجية مع في ظل تزويدكم لمركز نايف أو منطقة نايف؟ سيدي الصوت.
اليوم تتكلم دكتور عن أزمة موجودة في الدولة كلها، وخاصة لما كانت عملية التحدي الموجود، إن كيف أولاً تحافظ على مرتب أفرادك، وثانياً كيف تزود الأفراد في الميدان. اليوم هناك كانت توجيهات معالي القائد العام على أساس أن يكون تحويل الفئات إلى قطاعات، أو تحويل العمل إلى موضوع القطاعات، بحيث أن يكون عندنا 3 قطاعات تعمل في شرطة دبي، وهذه القطاعات كانت في البداية تعمل بنظام 12 ساعة 12 ساعة دوام، وتأتي فرقة ثانية 12 ساعة دوام. وكان التزويد آتي من الإدارات الإدارية اللي العمل فيها عن بعد، فتم تزويد الإدارات الميدانية بأفراد، بحيث أن الأفراد الإداريين يعملون أو يدعمون الإدارات الميدانية في الميدان. هذا كان تقريبا العمل الموجود، وكان هناك في دعم مثل ما ذكرت لك أن الفريق اللي موجود، الفرق التقصي، الفرق الطبي، كانوا يدعمون هذه الفرق من حيث الحفاظ على سلامتهم ودعمهم. وأيضا لا ننسى أن هذا الدعم اللي أتى لعوائلهم، هذا ساعدهم على اساس انهم يعملون كلهم بجد واجتهاد، والعلاقه المجتمعيه اللي حقيقه موجوده في شرطه دبي دائما بين الشرطه وبين الجمهور ساعد على امور كثيره، في تخطي امور كثيره من العمل، بحيث ان الشرطه بدات تقدم خدمات او مساعدات للجمهور من حيث تقديم الكمامات، تقديم بعض المواد الغذائيه، حثهم على التواجد في مساكنهم، الابتعاد، عدم التقارب، فامور كثيره. بالاضافه ان عارف ان كان عندنا تحدي كبير بالنسبه للغات الموجوده او الجنسيات الموجوده، كيف احنا قدرنا نتعامل مع هذه الجنسيات من خلال التواصل الاجتماعي، من خلال الانظمه الحديثه الموجوده في دوله الامارات العربيه المتحده. وعارف ان هناك البنيه التحتيه في الدوله ساعدت على هذا الامر من خلال استخدام الانظمه الذكيه في التوجيه، في المخالفات، في المتابعات، في النزول الميداني بالنسبه للفرق الموجوده.
Basically, the answer. Do I need to translate the answer? Okay. So basically, it was a different task. We had certain group of our employee as an admin employee, and the other part was as a field operational employee. So we had an order from His Excellency Chief Commander to get in touch with people who worked from home and ask them to get into field work, especially where a knife area was an area where the rate of corona infection or COVID-19 was very high. So the actual government of Dubai decided to lock down the area in order to basically protect those people moving to other parts of Dubai or other parts of the Emirates. So we worked as one team. We worked in collaboration with other organizations such as health, municipality. So we built up a strong team with one strategy, is to look after the area and not allow whomever within or the population within knife area to move around in order to protect the whole city. So we do work smart. We rely on technology because we had it proactively. Everything was ready. But when we faced COVID-19, we brought all technologies into operation. So I think we did it successfully. So
Doctor, we should not forget also the volunteer people, which they help us also to work. This volunteer people, they made us or they give us more help to be close to the people. You know, we have around 200 different nationality in Dubai. So that's why.
So they activated the role of volunteers in Dubai.
Of course, they help us.
But Your Excellency, up to
be
certain
close
extent.
to these people.
Yeah, but up to certain extent, because they're not well trained. So basically, up to certain extent, I think their role was basically to help you in certain aspects. Yes.
Of course.
So I just go to the States again. Mr. Becker, do you see Corona? I mean, for sure, we have advantages and disadvantages. From your point of view, what are the advantages? I mean, we've discussed about disadvantages, but do you see it bright? I mean, do you see bright future after COVID-19?
Well, maybe in some respects in training. I know that when we shut down, the schools had to go to online learning. They had a lot of difficulty with that. A lot of students don't have computers. A lot of teachers weren't equipped to effectively convert their lessons into online, where they had a lot of student interaction. When you develop an online training program, you usually start with a storyboard and build on it, and it becomes very effective. But when you take a lecture, a pure lecture, and then try to all of a sudden convert it to online, there's difficulties. And a lot of the police academies, I think, face that as well. And I see a lot of learning has taken place, a lot of improvement in those areas. And in some instances, maybe the online instead of the in-person can be effectively used, and it could be a cost savings. So things like that, I think we're learning from. Also the cooperation of working together, not only with the health departments, the CDC, but with other countries, like this webinar, where we're learning from each other and what works and what doesn't work. I think those are things that we're learning, and things that have become a huge advantage in future pandemics or emergencies that we're just certainly not used to.
So do you think COVID-19 as the virus or as a pandemic brought everyone together?
Yes, I think in some ways it has. It's made everyone really pay attention to each other, to respect each other. Like wearing a mask is not so much for the person wearing the mask protection, but for the other person. So I think in some of those areas, we've are learning to be a lot more aware of each other and how to protect one another.
The same question goes to the UK as well, Mr. Griffiths. Do you think we'll be different? The whole world will be different after COVID-19? And if so, when? When do you expect this is going to be over?
Oh, I don't know, do we? It's the big question as to when normality will truly return. And I don't think anybody's got the answer yet. And I think that's the important bit, is we still need to safeguard ourselves through health guidance. But like most things in life, you know, we've got a good adage around, you know, in any crisis, there's opportunity. And there has been opportunities for development around closer partner workmanship arrangements, around the use of technology, digital connections with the public, etc., and causing people to think differently about the services they provide. So, you know, I would like to see that those sort of elements develop further, enhanced, and us move forward as a nation, so that actually, you know, as we continue to try and fight the virus, because we still are in that battle, that we can still get to some normality in terms of what the world was like beforehand.
You know, like there were certain activities such as sport activities used to bring nations together, but today COVID-19, we'd consider it as a tournament, which brought everything together. Now, the same question goes to Italy as well. Do you see it bright, or do you have a doubt? Do you think after, will we be over COVID-19? And if so, do you see it as being a bright future for Italy and for the whole world? Major Corona.
That's as Mr. Griffith said, it's difficult to say what will happen. I think that all around the world, we are sure that we learned a lot from this pandemic. Right now, we have to manage this lesson learned of the pandemic in order to avoid the same mistakes for the future, firstly. Secondly, to change our behavior towards the world, approaching life, firstly, and approaching everything, approaching the environmental problem, firstly, because if on one kind we have a lot of problem caused by the pandemic, and firstly health problem and a lot of death, and then economic problem, we have also on the other side a good result from the environmental point of view, because we saw that, for example, the atmosphere was more clear because of everything were in lockdown. So we have to manage thinking, balancing different different situation, but different interests, I think. So nobody can predict how will be the future with or without the second wave of coronavirus. But right now we have a few lessons learned from where we can start to go way ahead.
Mr. Moya, as a researcher, do you think we see bright future, or from research perspective, economy is affected, the whole world is affected, people lost jobs? So do you see it bright?
I think there will be a very significant economic challenge, very clearly, and the predictions here in terms of the levels of unemployment that we may see are very serious, and so we may be entering, even as we move from a public health crisis into an economic and social crisis, and I think that's very significant. And big decisions will have to be made about things like the amount of support which people will need to get through that difficult period. So we shall see. But I think there's obviously a real serious economic problem now which needs to be addressed by policymakers. I mean, I think some of the good things that have come out of it. One is levels of if you like, community cohesion and civic spirit. In difficult times, people tend to band together. Certainly in the community where I live here in Oxford, in England, we've seen streets, people who live in neighbourhoods digitally connecting with each other much more than they used to. Certainly on my road, we all know each other now. People never used to know their neighbours so much. We all now know each other pretty well. So that has been a very significant achievement, actually. I think communities have come together. And I think the other thing, which is very significant, certainly here, is the amount of sympathy and support for emergency service workers, such as the police, but also our NHS, our health workers as well, which we've seen that we really do all rely on our health service, on our police service, and I think on our education service and so on. And so I think there'll be a much greater level of there's already great support for our emergency services in this country, but I think the level of support will be greater. And I think that when we look at priorities for public investment and expenditure in the next few years, I think some of those public services, I think there's a recognition that they perhaps haven't been given enough support in the last decade, and perhaps it's time for them to get a greater emphasis. Some of our lowest paid people in this country who work in our health service, for example, have been on the brunt of some of the most serious health problems, and many people who work in the public services have sadly died, and of course they've had to confront the virus at the front line. So I think there'll be a lot of public support for our emergency service workers as we move into the next few years. So maybe that's a sort of positive thing which will come out of it. We'll see some prioritization of some of those areas in the future.
Do you think we'll face a second wave?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I'm not an epidemiologist, and I don't know how this. And even when you look at the people who do understand these things, I mean, they don't know either. I mean, and they're sort of looking at the data, and they're looking at historic patterns, and it's obviously depends on how the virus will evolve. But there are probably reasons to be concerned that there might be a second wave, and we've already seen increases in infection in parts of the world that have managed to get the rates down, and now they're going up in certain areas. But I guess the one thing that we do have is now some experience of how to deal with this, and hopefully we can move to a situation where we don't have to lock everything down. We can maybe have more localized lockdowns and controls, particularly if we can trace the infections and we have a better testing regime. And I mean, in this country, there's still a bit of a way to go in terms of getting the infrastructure in place to do that. But hopefully we've learned something in the last few months, and we can then use that to lock down where we need to, but allow other less risky areas to open up. So hope if there is a second wave, hopefully we'll be in a better position to deal with it.
Thank you. سعادة اللواء عبد الله الغيثي, هل do you see it? Are you positive? Do you think it's going to be positive after COVID-19, or are you optimistic or pessimistic? هل سعادتك تنظر إلى ما بعد كوفيد بإيجابية أم بسلبية؟ الصوت.
حقيقة بالنسبة اليوم كورونا علمتنا أشياء كثيرة، علمتنا أمور حياتية جديدة، فبالتالي طبيعي نحن لازم ننظر للحياة بأنها حياة طبيعية، ونحن لا ننسى أن دائما متفائلين بالخير، ودائما تفائلوا بالخير تجدوه، يعني هذه مقولة موجودة، فدائما نتفائل نحن بالخير. وبالعكس يعني الأمور أصبحت أكثر وضوحا. الجائحة هاي علمتنا أشياء، علمتنا كيف الإنسان يقدر يتعايش مع الأحداث، كيف يقدر ياخذ قراراته في هذه الأزمات الوبائية خلينا نقول فيها، لكن فعلا نحن بعد نقول نحن نتأمل الخير، وإن شاء الله نتأمل أن نرجع أقوى ما كنا في السابق، لأن عرفنا الطريق الصحيح وكيف نقدر نتعامل مع الأحداث، وكيف نقدر نتعامل مع الأزمات بجدية وبطريقة وبمجهود متكامل وبفرق متكاملة وبروح الفريق الواحد، وهذا ما تعلمناه في هذه الفترة اللي مرت.
The answer was the same as well. We learned lots of lessons, and one of it is just how to stick together, how to work in one team, and how to face our problems as a team and not as individuals. And His Excellency seeing the future as being bright. I think everything is going to be much better. So let's go together, be optimistic, never be pessimistic. Just believe in yourself as being a mankind. You've got a great power, but you need to concentrate on your value. You need to concentrate on your strength. Never underestimate your value. Just move forward and things will move along with you. I think from Dubai, we've reached to the end of this session. I would like to thank all of you dear guests, Mr. Mike Becker from the States, Major Gerardina Corona from Italy, Mr. Paul Griffith from the UK, Mr. Rick Moyer from the UK, and His Excellency Abdel Al-Ghaiti from Dubai. So it's the end of this session, but it's not the end of our life. And probably we're going to meet next time here physically in Dubai. So welcome to Dubai soon after COVID-19. So personally, I think I'm optimistic. I look into it in a positive way, and probably in a few years' time, this session is going to be physically, and it's going to be just here in Dubai. And you're more than welcome to visit our country, and we'll look after you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.